Hi, this is Professor Favors with American Literature. And so today's topic is on Eudora Alice Welty's A Worn Path. And she is part of, or her literary work is part of modernism. So this is American Literature, Eudora Alice Welty's A Worn Path, part of modernism. This presentation is subject to fair use. So this is Eudora Alice Welty, born 1909, died 2001. Eudora Alice Welty was born in Jackson, Mississippi, the daughter of an insurance agent father and a retired teacher mother. Her family had moved to Mississippi from the Ohio Valley region, and Welty enjoyed an idyllic childhood spent in Mississippi with summers visiting relatives in the Midwest. While in high school, Welty published works in a national magazine before attending Mississippi State College for Women for an associate's degree, then transferring to the University of Wisconsin in order to finish her bachelor's degree in English. After earning that degree in 1929, Welty enrolled at Columbia University but could not find full time work in New York City during the Depression. Due to finances, she returned home to Jackson, where she would reside for the rest of her life. So, About a Warm Path, which was published in 1941, although she won a Pulitzer Prize for her novel, The Optimist's Daughter, Welty is largely known as a master of short fiction. Her work engages Southern themes, often dealing with the problems of post Reconstruction South. A Worn Path, originally published in Atlantic Monthly, is one of Welty's most famous and most anthologized short stories. It transposes the hero's journey, tales in which a hero sets off on an adventure and is changed at the end, onto a seemingly simple tale of an elderly African American grandmother, Phoenix Jackson, retrieving medication for her sick grandson. So we have some historical implications. We have now extended from 1828 to 1970, um, and that is largely due to some aspect of the history that we're going to explore with the Great Migration that you see there between 1910 and 1970. So remember, Jim Crow was created, and so the reason why there is a great migration of Black Americans is because of Jim Crow. And it was Jim Crow as a character was created by Thomas Dartmouth Rice, a white actor performing blackface. 1829 was when Jackson became president. So we still have anti-slavery sentiment, which is your abolitionist movement, Nat Turner's revolt, slavery debates, Oberlin College enrolling female students, Florida, Texas becoming states, the Mexican American War, Fugitive Slave Act, Dred Scott Sanford decision, and then we have all of your amendments from American Civil War, Emancipation Proclamation, as well as the Reconstruction era, and then the assassination of Lincoln. So then we have 13th, 14th, 15th amendments, and then the end of the abolitionist movement. So from there, 1865 to 1913, we have movement in terms of technological movement and rapid economic growth, manufacturing. We have the agricultural um, production in the South, but we have manufacturing production in the North. And so then we also have the National American Women Suffrage Association, and at the same and within the same year, the Separate Car Act, which outlines equal but separate accommodations. So in response to that, which is also in response to Jim Crow, we had Plessy v. Ferguson, and then during this time, the Spanish American War. So even though we are still in an era of trying to get back on our feet, so to speak, from the Civil War, we're still engaged in other types of wars. And then we are engaged in wars at home. So 1910 to 1970, Great Migration, where blacks escaped the poverty and Jim Crow laws. Then we have World War I, 1914 to 1918, World War II, 1939 to 1945, and then the 19th Amendment in 1920, which gave the women's right to vote, and then 1954, Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka rules that separate but equal is unconstitutional, which officially ends Jim Crow laws. So let's review Jim Crow laws very quickly, which outlines segregation of whites and persons of color. And then Jim Crow laws, of course, 1877 to 1950, or the 1950s, which enforced racial segregation in the South between the end of Reconstruction and the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement. And it was named after a particular individual, Jim Crow, who performed um, in blackface. Southern state legislators passed Jim Crow laws, which were based upon this idea of anyone ascertainable or strongly suspected of Black ancestry in any degree, which would be deemed a person of color. Separation of whites from persons of color, which include public transportation, schools, parks, cemeteries, theaters, restaurants, and it prevented contact between Blacks and whites. So Jim Crow laws were codified under the Plessy v. Ferguson Supreme Court case, which made separate but equal constitutional at that time. All right, let's recap Jim Crow laws timeline. So don't forget 1828, Thomas Dartmouth Rice creates the minstrel character Jim Crow to stereotype Black character. The 13th Amendment is ratified, abolishing slavery. Hall v. Decour rules that states cannot prohibit segregation on carriers, such as railroads, streetcars, and riverboats. The Civil Rights Act of 1875 is declared unconstitutional, sanctioning separate but equal. The Louisiana Separate Car Act requires equal but separate accommodations. The Supreme Court holds the Separate Car Act in the Plessy v. Ferguson case, which solidified Jim Crow. Jim Crow laws expand to segregation in all ways of life. U.S. Supreme Court rules in Brown v. Board of Education that separate but equal is unconstitutional, which opens the doors for Civil Rights Act of 1964, Voting Rights Act of 1965, which now gave Black women the right to vote, Fair Housing Act of 1968, and then we had the Loving v. Virginia case, which opened the doors to interracial marriages. So these are the advances that end the Jim Crow era. Let's recap realism, which is that portrayal of everyday people. Um, Not many authors like Frost and Eudora Welty are typical realists, but they do portray realist um, aspects of a particular character within their literary work. So, here reviewing the differences, romantic writing focuses on the fantastical, heroic, realism focuses on accurate imitation of life, truth, and fiction. So it focuses on, or it chooses the ordinary citizen to depict and explore. And so then remember that realism was influenced by the American Civil War, and realistic writing typically focuses on the human cost of the American Civil War. So introducing introduction to modernism, reinventing the world. And here are some historical drivers for reinvention. So there is, at the beginning of the course, there is an overview of American literature with a few, with a separate lecture on the modernist period, so or modernism, and so you can watch that one. This here is an extension of that particular lecture. So historical drivers for reinvention. World War One was the biggest driver for modernism. It is considered the Great War. World War One was a European conflict with Great Britain, France, Russia, and Italy considered the Allied forces, and Germany and Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire considered the Central Powers. World War I was considered the first global war and first fully industrialized war, featuring shelling, machine guns, mustard gas, and advanced weaponry. Tensions rose when Adolf Hitler came to power in the 1930s, which led to World War II. Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor forced the United States to enter World War II, which resulted in American growth, immigration, industrialization, technological improvements, and development of modern cities. The Industrial Revolution gave rise to factories moving the country from agricultural roots to industrial based economy. The invention of the automobile and the assembly line in the early 1920s created an industry, spurred investments into infrastructure, and made personal travel available. So everyone started to get on the road. The Great Depression, though, of 1929 was a result of a market collapse, creating an economic downturn in which banks shut down, workers became unemployed, and droughts led to people becoming homeless looking for work. So now we have presidential intervention. Franklin Roosevelt was elected in 1932. He ushered in the New Deal, creating the Works Progress Administration, which used federal funds to put people to work, building America's infrastructure and provide employment for writers and artists through the Federal Writers Project. It also addressed poverty in the American South. Although federal funding addressed poverty, people began moving from agricultural areas into cities, marking the period as the Great Migration, in which Black Americans left the South to escape poverty and Jim Crow laws. They moved to cities such as Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, Philadelphia, New York. This served as a major population shift in American history, resulting in cultural cross pollination, cultural revolutions such as the Harlem Renaissance, and development of creativity. So then we have literary considerations. Modernism is a catch all for global movement. It responded to the wars of the period, which was characterized as writers feeling betrayed by the United States. So always remember that writers, the literary writers that you read, whoever it is that you read, they are usually responding to some sort of event that is going on in their lives and that's affecting the lives of other people. Literary writers and their works question the truths of the past, the status quo, and their disaffection with politics caused by World War I. It references, when you're thinking about poetry, there's a difference between high modernism and low modernism. Modernism focuses on the formal, examining how much America has changed and shifted and has become fragmented and disjointed, while low modernism experimented with form. So prose, both fiction and nonfiction, focused on writers, challenging form, style, and content. Many writers were explicit critical in their political critiques. The Great Depression gave rise to communism, while the women's suffrage movement spurred early feminism. And then, of course, paperback books and magazines meant that writers were reaching a wider audience with radical messaging. All right, so now let's discuss a worn path, and it's essentially understanding the different paths that each character within her literary work take. So let's look at some preliminary considerations in terms of questions and strategies. So what is the meaning of path? In terms of the concept of the work, how is the author defining path? What determines a path? So you have different types of paths. You have a financial path, you have an emotional path, you have a path that we often call a life journey. So what determines a path? Or they're different paths. You're going to see the main character, the main protagonist paths, and her reasoning for why she is on her journey, and then she um, sort of encounters other people along her path. And then how is path considered in a worn path? All right. So if we were in a classroom, I would usually have students to divide into groups, and I will assign one strategy per group, or sometimes two strategies. And so for this is define the path, interpret the path, apply the path. So that's what we're going to do now. So define the path. It was December, a bright frozen day in the early morning. Far out in the country, there was an old Negro woman with her head tied in a red rag coming along a path through the pine woods. Her name was Phoenix Jackson. She was very old and small, and she walked slowly in the dark pine shadows, moving a little from side to side in her steps, with the balanced heaviness and lightness of a pendulum in a grandfather clock. She carried a thin, small cane made from an umbrella, and with this she kept tapping the frozen earth in front of her. This made a grave and persistent noise in the still air that seemed meditative, like the chirping of a solitary little bird. She wore a dark striped dress reaching down to her shoe tops, and an equally long apron of bleached sugar sacks with a full pocket, all neat and tidy, but every time she took a step, she might have fallen over her shoelaces, which dragged from her unlaced shoes. She looked straight ahead. Her eyes were blue with age. Her skin had a pattern all its own of numberless branching wrinkles, and as though a whole little tree stood in the middle of her forehead, but a golden color ran underneath, and the two knobs of her cheeks were illumined by a yellow burning under the dark. Under the red rag hair came down on her neck in the frailest of ringlets, still black and with an odor like copper. So what we get here in terms of when we want to define the path, we're just looking at her patterns. We're looking at how she dresses. We're looking at the fact that she's much older because of her numberless branching wrinkles. But we definitely get a look at, we get a visual image of the path she has taken in life in terms of how she dresses and how she conducts herself. She's wearing a red rag. She's coming along on a path through the pine woods. We know her name. She was very old and small. She walked slowly. She moved a little from side to side in her steps, balancing the heaviness and lightness. She had a small cane made from an umbrella, which makes her a bit handy. She kept tapping the frozen earth. She wore a dark striped dress. So we get who she is, how she dresses, how she conducts herself in terms of just her everyday life patterns. Everyone has sort of like a go to dress or a go to outfit or a go to look that they have. And so, all of this information here is just basically introducing the character, the old Negro woman with her head tied in a red rag named Phoenix Jackson. She's our main protagonist. So let's define the path in terms of life chains. Now and then there was a quivering in the thicket. Old Phoenix said, "Out of my way, all you foxes, owls, beetles, jackrabbits, coons, and wild animals. Keep out from under these feet, little Bob Whites. Keep the big wild hogs out of my path. Don't let none of those come running my direction. I got a long way." Under her small, black, freckled hand, her cane, limber as a buggy whip, would switch at the brush as if to rouse up any hiding things. On she went. The woods were deep and still. The sun made the pine needles almost too bright to look at, up where the wind rocked. The cones dropped as light as feathers. Down in the hollow was the mourning dove. It was not too late for him. The path ran uphill. "Seemed like there's chains about my feet. Time I get this far," she said in the voice of argument old people keep to use within themselves. "Something always take a hold of me on this hill. Please, I should stay." After she got to the top, she turned and gave a full, severe look behind her where she had come. "Up through pines," she said at length, "now down through oaks." So we understand that she understands her own environment. She understands what could get in her way, what could run in her direction, and what could prevent her from getting to what she need to get to. She said, "I got a long way, so So I don't have time for all of these life chains. Now, this chains represents here from Welty's writing about, or her literary works reflecting the post Reconstruction South. So even though people are free, slaves are free, there's Emancipation Proclamation, you still have other issues like Jim Crow laws that began with Jim Crow um, as a character. And so the perception of the old Negro woman is going to be um, something that she takes in because of her own life chains. That could be explicit, specific, or it could be figurative as well. So she understands her environment. She understands the foxes, what the purpose of the foxes, the paths of the foxes, the paths of the owls, the paths of the beetles, the jackrabbits, the coos, and wild animals. She knows what kind of paths those animals take, and how she doesn't want them to come running in her direction. If they all decided to come running in her direction, it's going to keep her from walking out her path because she has a long way. It's not like she can take some time to rest beyond needing to rest because she's walking too much. So then, seemed like there's chains about my feet time I get this far. And then sometimes something always take a hold of me on this heel. So something about this heel sort of gives her pause. It gives her, it's a path that might be a struggle for her. But as long as she continues to walk, she can look behind her. After she got to the top of that hill, she turned and gave a full, severe look behind her where she had come. So that could be metaphorical, right? The process of moving out of one particular social position, one particular economic position, one particular from master slave position, from slave to free position, looking back from whence she came, or where she had come. So the chains that held her behind are the chains that no longer keep her from going because she got a long way. All right, define the path like thorns. So her eyes opened their widest and she started gently, but before she got to the bottom of the hill, a bush caught her dress. Her fingers were busy and intent, but her skirts were full and long, so that before she could pull them free in one place, they were caught in another. It was not possible to allow the dress to tear. I in a thorny bush, she said. Thorns, you're doing your appointed work, never one to let folks pass. No, sir. Old eyes thought you were a pretty little green bush. Finally, trembling all over, she stood free, and after a moment dared to stoop for her cane. Walk pretty, she said. This the easy place. This the easy going. She followed the track, swaying through the quiet bare fields, through the little strings of trees, silver in their dead leaves, past cabins, silver from weather, with the doors and windows boarded shut, all like old women under a spell sitting there, I walking in their sleep, she said, nodding her head vigorously. In a ravine she went where a spring was silently flowing through a hollow log. Old Phoenix bent and drank. Sweet gum makes the water sweet, she said, and drank more. Nobody know who made this well, but it was here when I was born. I think this last sentence right here is very interesting. Nobody know who made this well, for it was here when I was born. So it's not. It's in some ways you. In some ways, life kind of works for you without you having to work for it. That this is a well that has is it can be considered um, personified in this way, but it's not truly. It's just a well that was there. Someone before her time made that well and didn't know that in her time she would need that well. So even though she goes through life little thorns, her dress got caught, meaning that her life got caught. and her fingers were busy and intent, but her skirts were full and long, so that before she could pull them free in one place, they were caught in another. Like life can get you caught, can catch you in different ways. You can be going one path and doing very well, and making really great progress, and then something will hit your path to get you turned around, to the point that anyone who has worn a dress, and any woman who has worn a dress that might have been too long or that was sort of clingy on the bush, you know how hard it is to turn around and try to get that dress out of that bush. It's almost like the bush is holding tight to the dress, and so one wrong turn and the dress could tear, or one wrong turn and the dress could sort of, the the branch could pull the dress off of you. So this is life, how life's little thorns can affect you. This could be a person who was once married, or who was going to school or doing something and then got married and got turned around by the wrong person. Or this is a person who had to deal with family members, something happened, and the little thorns of life with that happened. But this is just your life getting caught up in your life or your dress getting caught on thorns. And then there's an appointed work for thorns, not necessarily divine, but there is an appointed. Thorns do what thorns do. Thorns catch you or pull at you or keep you from moving forward, because as long as you are involved in the thorn, it's going to keep you from moving forward. So uh, just as the whale has its appointed work, right, implicitly, the thorns have their appointed work. And when she says, "Oh, I thought you were just a pretty little green bush," she doesn't necessarily have to be old to perceive something as safe and find yourself in something that is actually thorny. This could happen to a young person. This could happen to an old person. This could happen to a middle-aged person, right? But she thought that what she encountered was something no more than a little green bush, when it was a thorn. And so then once she gets free, right, she manages to finally get free. Now she's in a state of mind where she wants to walk pretty. Whatever walk she had, whatever path she had prior to this statement here, because she's now in an easy place. This is an easy going. So if she was ever a former slave, slaves didn't have the opportunity to walk pretty. It wasn't an easy place. It wasn't easy going. But now, even in her old life, she can walk pretty. But I think nobody know who made this well, for it was here when I was born. Is that somebody had the foresight, from her history, from way before she was born, to make sure there was a well for anyone who would need one. All right, so now let's interpret the path, which is under social perception. So, a white man finally came along and found her, a hunter, a young man, with his dog on a chain. "Well, Granny," he laughed, "what are you doing there?" "Lying on my back like a June bug waiting to be turned over, mister," she said, reaching up her hand. He lifted her up, gave her a swing in the air, and set her down. "Anything broken? Anything broken, Granny?" "No, sir. Them old dead weeds is springy enough," said Phoenix. When she had got her breath, "I thank you for your trouble." "Where do you live, Granny?" he asked, while the two dogs were growling at each other. "Away back yonder, sir, behind the ridge. You can't even see it from here." "On your way home?" "No, sir. I go into town." "I bound to go to town, mister," said Phoenix, "this time come around." He gave another laugh, filling the whole landscape. "I know you old colored people wouldn't miss going to town to see Santa Claus." But something held old Phoenix very still. The deep lines in her face went into a fierce and different radiation. Without warning, she had seen with her own eyes a flashing nickel fall out of the man's pocket onto the ground. "How old are you, Granny?" he was saying. "There's no telling, mister," she said. "No telling." That last statement says a lot about the transition from slavery to freedom. that many people on the plantation were born, but not really realizing when they were born, what age they were. And so she understands that she's old because she has wrinkled lines, right? Uh, she calls herself old, but she may not necessarily know her age just because she's old. Uh, this contrast between a white man and a Negro woman um, is still in sort of like this Reconstruction era, everyone getting out of this understand, or everyone moving out of this understanding of master slave relationships or master slave dynamics economically and socially, and to now she could have a conversation without him maybe capturing her as a slave. She's not a fugitive slave because she's free. So a white man finally come along and helping her, and lifting her up and swinging her in the air and setting her down is very much in contrast to what you see in the other literary works that are closer to when the American Civil War was happening or the Emancipation Proclamation. And so she talks about her home, and you can't see it from there. So that tells you that she's gotten a lot further away from her base. Her base is her home, of course. And then there's this perception, this social perception from the white man about colored people and how they go to town to see Santa Claus. And there was something fierce in her face, a different radiation that could suggest she was getting upset by what he said, but it's not clear here. But then we understand that there was a flashing nickel that fell out of his pocket. And then we understand that she doesn't know what her age is. She doesn't know how old she is. But this right here is the social perception that we see, the dynamic between an old Negro woman and a white man with dogs. And these dogs are having a growl at each other. And she's making a note of the fact that she doesn't know her age. So interpret the past, race perception. Then she gave a little cry and clapped her hands and said, "Get on away from here, dog. Look at that dog." She laughed as if in admiration. "He ain't scared of nobody. He a big black dog." She whispered, "Sick 'em. Watch me get rid of that cur," said the man. "Sick 'em, Pete, sick 'em." Phoenix heard the dogs fighting and heard the man running and throwing sticks. She even heard a gunshot. The man came back and his dog panted about them. "Well, I scared him off that time," he said, and then he laughed and lifted his gun and pointed it at Phoenix. She stood straight and faced him. "Doesn't the gun scare you?" he said, still pointing it. "No, sir. I seen plenty go off closer by in my day, and for less than what I done," she said, holding utterly still. He smiled and shouldered the gun. "Well, Granny," he said, "you must be 100 years old and scared of nothing. I'd give you a dime if I had any money with me, but you take my advice and stay home, and nothing will happen to you." "I bound to go on my way, mister," said Phoenix. She inclined her head in the red rag. Then they went in different directions, but she could hear the gun shooting again and again over the hill. So now we know that Phoenix has the wherewithal and the freedom to go about as she pleases. The gun, the gun is just a holdover from the fugitive slave laws. That's what that is. It's just a holdover. It's the prerogative of the white man to lift up his gun and point it at Phoenix, hoping that she will fall and beg for mercy. But she stood straight and faced him, and that's likely because she knew she had laws um, that were behind her in terms of being able to move about the way that she wants to move about. And he asked her, "Doesn't a gun scare you?" And she said, "No, sir. I've seen plenty go off closer by in my day." So she's familiar. The old Negro woman is familiar with this type of process of dealing with this type of race issue, dealing with a white man as an old Negro woman. She's accustomed to the custom, or she's accustomed to the path of custom, the customary way of a white man scaring um, a slave or black people just in general. And so he offers advice to her to stay home and nothing will happen to you. That's a threat. That's again, that's a holdover from Fugitive Slave Act laws. However, she says, "I bound to go on my way, mister." She inclined her head in the red hat, and then they went in different directions, meaning that he was all bark. He couldn't. There's nothing that he could have done. He could shoot. That she even heard a gunshot, meaning that he probably shot one of the dogs. He could shoot that animal, but he couldn't shoot that human because if he could shoot her, he would have shot her. So they were both. He was forced to go in his direction, and she went in her direction. She could hear the shooting, but that shooting did not apply to her. So let's apply the path, social conduct. Please, Missy, will you lace up my shoe? She held up her foot. What do you want, Grandma? See my shoe? Said Phoenix. Do all right for out in the country, but wouldn't look right to go in a big building. Stand still then, Grandma, said the lady. She put her packages down on the sidewalk beside her and laced and tied both shoes tightly. Can't lace 'em with a cane, said Phoenix. Thank you, Missy. I doesn't mind asking a nice lady to tie up my shoe when I gets out on the street. Moving slowly and from side to side, she went into the big building and into a tower of steps where she walked up, around, and around until her feet knew to stop. She entered a door, and there she saw nailed up on the wall the uh, the document that had been stamped with the gold seal and framed in a gold frame, which matched the dream that was hung up in her head. Here I be, she said. There was a fixed and ceremonial stiffness over her body. A charity case, I suppose, said an attendant who sat at the desk before her. So she's walking into a building that requires her to have a certain social conduct. She did ask for help. She's not too old to ask for help. She struggles with her shoelaces. This is explored at the beginning of the work. So she did ask for help. She cares about how she looks. Remember, she wanted to walk pretty, and so now she want to be able to go into that big building and look like she basically has some sense. And so once she receives someone tying her shoelaces and she goes into the big building, we understand now what social category society is placing upon her. So she's moved out of probably slave to free, to old life, not knowing her age, to dealings with a white man, to now being considered a charity case. She's a that is now the social um, perception, or the social there's social conduct, and then there's social perception of her, and so she's a charity case. So now she's going to conduct herself as a charity case. So apply the path, social currency. Speak up, Grandma, the woman said. What's your name? We must have your history, you know. Have you been here before? What seems to be the trouble with you? Old Phoenix only gave a twitch to her face as if a fly were bothering her. Are you deaf? Cried the attendant. But then the nurse came in. Oh, that's just old Aunt Phoenix, she said. She doesn't come for herself. She has a little grandson. She makes these trips just as regular as clockwork. She lives way she lives away back off the old Natchez trace. She bent down. Well, Aunt Phoenix, why don't you just take a seat? We won't keep you standing after your long trip. She pointed. The old woman sat down bolt upright in a chair. Now, how is the boy? Asked the nurse. Old Phoenix did not speak. I said, how is the boy? But Phoenix only waited and stared straight ahead, her face very solemn and drawn into rigidity. Is his throat any better? Asked the nurse. Aunt Phoenix, don't you hear me? Is your grandson's throat any better since the last time you came for the medicine? With her hands on her knees, the old woman waited silent, erect, and motionless, just as if she were in armor. You mustn't take up our time this way, Aunt Phoenix, the nurse said. Tell us quickly about your grandson and get it over. He isn't dead, is he? At least there came a flicker and then a flame of comprehension across her face, and she spoke. So there's some social currency with Phoenix Jackson. She's considered Aunt Phoenix. So this is her path. So she's considered Aunt Phoenix, and there's a whole narrative about why she takes the long trip. And there's some respect on the part of the attendant in a way, or the nurse, right? The nurse comes in. The nurse understands who Aunt Phoenix is, and she understands why she is now coming um, to the big building, which we now know is likely a clinic. And so there's this going back and forth, trying to get her to talk. We don't know why she doesn't want to talk, for whatever reason. And then there's this push to try to get her to speak about her grandson, what's going on with him any better. And then when the nurse asked, "He isn't dead, is he?" Then she decided to wake up out of her own um, emotional sleep. She was probably, considered psychologically or emotionally sleep at that moment, definitely tired if she had to make the long way. But once the nurse asked if he's dead, she had to immediately say, "Oh no, he's basically not dead." And so the social currency is that she has a great reputation in her society, even though she lived way back in the hills somewhere, on the old Natchez trace. She People know who she is. And so, and they know that she has a grandson who is sick, whose throat hurts or something like that, and that she makes the long trip for him. And not wanting to hear anything about death, she comes out of her emotional place with the flicker. All right, so apply the past social expectations. My grandson, it was my memory had left me. There I sat and forgot why I made my long trip. Forgot. The nurse frowned. After you came so far? Then Phoenix was like an old woman begging a dignified forgiveness for waking up frightened in the night. "I never did go to school. I was too old at the surrender," she said in a softer voice. "I'm an old woman without an education. It was my memory failed me. My little grandson, he is just the same, and I forgot it in the coming." "Throat never heals, does it?" said the nurse, speaking in a loud, sure voice to old Phoenix. By now she had a card with something written on it, a little list. "Yes, swallowed lie. When was it? January 2, 3 years ago?" Phoenix spoke unasked now. "No, missy, he not dead. He just the same." Every little while his throat began to close up again, and he not able to swallow, he not get his breath, he not able to help himself. So the time come around and I go on another trip for the soothing medicine. So her purpose in life basically is to uh, act almost like a soother for her grandson. So he messed up and swallowed lie, um, and um, and he's still alive when he gets the soothing medicine. So he's not dead yet. I thought it was interesting that she mentions that she's never had an education. She's an old woman. She was too old at the surrender. So by the time, people on the slave plantations lived there all the way to their older age. So by the time there is surrender and there is Emancipation Proclamation, freedom, they don't have the same energy. They don't have the same energy to do education. The young ones do, but she's not going to be someone who goes to school. It's not the same kind of thinking that we have today, where 60-year-olds, 70-year-olds, 80-year-olds will go um, will go to college. Sometimes just for hobby reasons. Sometimes they want to do something with their lives. But throat never heals, does it? Said the nurse, speaking in a loud, sure voice. So the throat from the grandson who swallowed the lie never heals, but soothing medicine keeps him going. So in some ways, I don't know if lie can kill you, but she doesn't want him to die. So she would rather do this long trip to try to find something that would soothe him than to just let it pass, let him pass. And I have to assume that the grandson is the only person in her life. All right, apply the path social accountability. All right, the doctor said as long as you came to get it, you could have it, said the nurse, but it's an obstinate case. My little grandson, he sit up there in the house all wrapped up, waiting by himself. Phoenix went on, we is the only two left in the world. He suffer and it don't seem to put him back at all. He got a sweet look. He gonna last. He wear a little patch quilt and peep out, holding his mouth open like a little bird. I remember so plain now. I not going to forget him again. No, the whole enduring time. I could tell him from all the others in creation. All right. The nurse was trying to hush her now. She brought her a bottle of medicine. Charity, she said, making a check mark in a book. Old Phoenix held the bottle close to her eyes and then carefully put it into her pocket. I thank you, she said. It's Christmas time, Grandma, said the attendant. Could I give you a few pennies out of my purse? 5 pennies is a nickel, said Phoenix stiffly. Here's a nickel, said the attendant. Phoenix rose carefully and held out her hand. She received the nickel and then fished the other nickel out of her pocket and laid it beside the new one. She stared at her palm closely with her head on one side. So so we do have confirmation that they are the only two in the world. So she's not willing really to let the grandson go. She's not really to. She wants to stay on this path of being accountable for him. It's not only just her personal accountability, but there is some social accountability with still labeling her as charity and providing her with the medication, because the social accountability is sort of like the social services of our day. That there are some charity cases who can still get access to medicine, and basically the medicine is for the little grandson anyway. And so her accountability, she would rather do that long trip with her old age just to make sure that her grandson gets his soothing medication. Um, she brought her a bottle of medicine. So they also are in agreement with Phoenix to support her in her endeavor. They understand what her purpose in life is. They understand what she's been doing and how she's been helping her grandson. So they don't throw her away. They don't push her out. They are just as accountable to the grandson as the grandmother is accountable as well. All right, so what does the past symbolize? What could it mean? So, of course, it could be the patterns of life. So, all of the subheadings that you saw, the patterns of life, the chains of life, the thorns of life, social perception, race perception, social conduct, social currency, social expectations, social accountability. There's a direct path that you take whenever you are walking or doing something. There's a path of the way you think about things, how you perceive life. There are your own life patterns, the paths you have taken, whether they were good or bad. There are some chains in life. If you spend too much time, for example, in a toxic relationship, it's going to be chains on your mind, on your heart, and in your body. You can get caught up in the thorns of life. These are people who are oftentimes struggle with drugs, struggle with alcoholism, struggle with adultery, struggle with a number of things that have caught them initially and have kept them all turned around in it. And it's hard every time they try to turn around and get out of that thorn. Here's another thorn. Then there's social perception. The path of social perception can affect you in so many different ways, because social perception could also be perceived as rejection, people rejecting you for your gifts and talents or who you are. Then, of course, there's a race perception. We understand categories. We have class systems. Sometimes we have racial caste systems. And so we understand how one race can perceive another and what that does in terms of path. Then, how you conduct yourself. There's a way you conduct yourself in the house just by yourself. And then there's a way you conduct yourself socially. That if you do something like run a red light or crash a car, there is an accountability that you must take, and there's consequences. Social currency, social expectations, and then social accountability. So these are the different ways path the word path could be symbolized in uh, interpreted. All right, so this is Works Consultant. So Introduction to Modernism, Welty's A Warm Path. You can find it there. There's a Britannica entry for Jim Crow, and then all of the different resources that you are already familiar with in terms of how they might apply to the presentation. All right, so this is again Eudora Alice Welty's, and so there is a Britannica entry for her. She's an American author. Then there is a bibliography, and then as well as a biography. Thank you very much for listening.